Hello guys, and welcome to this VolksWizard video blog. Now in today's film we're going to try and answer a question I've been asked so many times in the 11 years since the newest of these two cars hit the road, and that is, what is best, a Mk4 Golf R32 or a Mk5? I did put out on Twitter whether there was any value in making this film, and I was literally overwhelmed with 2 replies, so thank you Jake and Steve. This film is for you. But I'm interested myself because whilst I've been immersed in these cars now for 15 years since the Mk4 came out, I still really find it hard to decide which one's best, and the reason for that is it really depends how you want to use the cars. So I think it's best if you make your own conclusion up, and I just give you the ingredients to do that. So without any further ado, let's go and see what makes these cars so different and so special. Okay, what better place to start on a R32 than under the bonnet. There we have the very special engine. It's basically an evolution of what we saw in the original Golf VR6 of 92. That was a 2.8 litre 12 valve engine. This is a 3.2 litre 24 valve engine. They are quite reliable. Okay, timing chains are becoming an issue now these cars are getting old, but this is 14 years old, and I think about 2 years ago it had its timing chain done, which cost £2,000, but it was 12 years old then, so a bit of a bill on a performance car at that age is only to be expected. If you were to buy a brand new Golf R, it would depreciate much more in a year than you'd spend in maintenance on one of these, even if you got unlucky with timing chains. So, you know, if you look at it like that, it's not an expensive car to own or run. They've all got Haldex all-wheel drive. They all came with a 6-speed manual for the UK market when they're right-hand drive. In Germany and other European markets where there's left-hand drive, you could actually order them with a DSG gearbox, which was presumably the same as in a TT 3.2. But yeah, generally it's a reliable engine, and it's a very charismatic engine. It makes a great noise, we'll come to that in the driving. But yeah, a very, very special engine that makes the Golf R32 what it is. Let's have a look at the rest of it. So, starting at the front, you get xenon headlights. They were quite an expensive option on the other cars in the range, but standard on the R32. You get that amazing front bumper, which the press at the time described it like the Porsche 911 Turbo, with the gaping air intakes, although they're actually not that gaping because 2 of them, the outer ones, don't actually do anything, they're solid. But the centre one feeds the aircon and the radiator. And you get headlamp washers, which is a statutory requirement with xenons to keep the lenses clean so you don't blind other people, as is self-levelling. These wheels are called Aristos. They're made by OZ or Oz, and they're a pretty wheel. They're a very motorsport inspired wheel. They come with 225/40/18 tyres. The brakes are very interesting as well. They're like a junior version of that on the B5 RS4 in that they're a 2-piece disc with an aluminium bell and pins that join the steel disc section. And they're really good brakes. They're expensive to replace though, that's the only downside. The discs used to be $250 a piece. You can get them a little bit cheaper now, but that's quite a lot of money when most Mk4 Golfs would be like £50 a disc tops. The other distinctive thing is a side skirt there. I think it might have been used on the anniversary model, but generally it's quite a rare thing on a Mk4 Golf. The mouldings and the doors, they're all the same. There's no wide arches on these cars. You do get a little tailgate spoiler that's a bit apologetic considering what's under the bonnet, but it does the job. You get the black and red rear lights that are just standard GTI fare. There's nothing too special about those, but they look good. What is special, again, like the front, you've got a really shapely rear bumper and obviously those 2 exhaust tailpipes that have become a bit of an R trademark. The back brakes are vented. That again is quite unusual on a Mk4 Golf. You get that on the V5 170 I think, and the 2.8 V6 4Motion. A lot of TTs have got vented rear brakes there, so they're not expensive. They are probably about £50 a disc. And again, blue calipers on the back. So let's have a look inside. And the first thing you notice are those very chunky Koenig, I think that's German for king, bucket seats. And yeah, they are very supportive. They do, tell you everything you need to know about what they were trying to do with this car. They are, very race inspired, but they're still really comfortable. You could get them in 3 different fabrics. This is the top of the range one, I guess, which was the leather option, even though probably a lot of it isn't leather. There is an Alcantara one that's got grey in grey, which isn't to everybody's taste in this kind of car. And then there's another one which isn't too bad at all, actually. Apart from the bolsters aren't leather at all. There's no leather in them, but they've got a cloth centre, but they wear quite well. But a lot of people got in trouble for calling them part leather when there was no bit of cow anywhere in them. You get this brushed aluminium on the doors and on the dash, or really the centre console, which, considering the GTIs had wood at the time, was a really nice touch. You know, why they put wood in the GTI, I don't know, but they made up for it in these. As with any Volkswagen, if you've got leather in your seats, you get heating. You get a special steering wheel as well, and the clocks are slightly different to normal. They do look very similar to some in the Bora, but the Bora ones don't say R32, but they do have the silver bezels and some of the other cars. And you got a nice little handbook with the R32 logo, which obviously you really ought to have if you buy one of these, but not every car has got one because some of them have been stolen. Every car's got single climate control, and this is a standard setup, so gamma radio cassette, 6 CD changer. You could have a delta radio, which would double size. You could have a navigation system, but that's terribly outdated now. Even the gear knob's got the R logo on it, and so have the pedals. That's a really nice touch. Oh, and the floor mats, of course, yeah. Very important to have the right floor mats with the R logo. There are some replicas around, but these are the genuine article, and they've worn really well, which I can't believe they're original to this car, but you never know. Mk4 Golfs were never really famous for having too much space in the back, but it's not bad. And again, you get the R logo on the seats. Yeah, you know, I know it's a sporty car, but they still kept a luxury feel to it. Our sill covers are nice as well. So many of the modern Golfs don't have anything there, and they get scratched up really easily. So yeah, that's really quite lovely. So let's move on to its younger brother. And again, let's start with the bonnets, under the bonnet even. Again, 24 valve, 3.2 litre, this time 250 horsepower. And again, it's got Haldex all-wheel drive. It's a little bit better than the one in the Mk4, a little bit more quicker working. This car's got a 6-speed DSG gearbox. You could have had 6-speed manual or DSG. I think probably still at this time we're probably more manual sold than DSG. But it's not a bad box. By this time the DSG had got a bit more reliable and generally works quite well most of the time. Now, while the Mk4 went for an aggressive front, I'm not really sure what they were trying to achieve with the Mk5, because they put a front bumper on it that to all intents and purposes looks like that off a Jetta or a Golf Estate. Okay, yeah, I know the intakes are a bit more pronounced, but the matte aluminium still looks like the chrome finish on those other two lesser cars. So, I don't know, a bit strange. Again, you've got xenons and headlamp washers as standard. This wheel is an 18-inch wheel, just like the one on the Mk4. The tyre size is identical. It's called a Zolder wheel, and they are pretty difficult to clean, which explains why they haven't been cleaned very well. The discs are one piece, so a lot cheaper to replace. I think you're talking about 60 quid for a disc, which is a lot cheaper. Single piston caliper, but they are bigger. These are 345s, the ones on the Mk4 are 334. So swings and roundabouts really. I think for a mass market car it's probably a better thing to have these, and these are actually a popular upgrade on Edition 30. So yeah, the brakes are no problem on these. The profile of the car again is the same. It's not wide arched. You get a little sill cover. This car's got a sunroof, which isn't a panoramic, it's just a pop-up. You could get a sunroof on the Mk4s, but this one hasn't got it. This car has got extra cost option tinted glass on the back windows. And the Mk5 R32 rear bumper is actually probably a bit more successful than the front of it, because it looks quite nice. Again, it's not overly aggressive. The reflectors are a bit weird, but there we go. Got the two exhausts in the centre. They're a little bit closer together on the 5. But, you know, so overall, really nicely done. Tailgate's the same. You do have a spoiler, which is a bit bigger than the Mk4's, and it's got an integrated third brake light, which goes wrong quite a lot, unfortunately. But overall, it's a much more mature car. And I think the driving experience reflects that. You can see by the ride height it sits a little bit higher. Let's have a look inside. Right, well again, we have some bucket seats. This time they're made by Recaro. I think because people had to pay extra for them, they went to a more expensive supplier. So they've got a very faint R logo there, but again, you don't really need a logo to tell you these mean business, because you've got these harness slots, which has the lever for tilting them forward, which in a 5-door car is a bit weird. There we are, 6-speed DSG gearbox, paddle shift on the back of the steering wheel. The steering wheel is specific to the R32, it's got the R logo there. The mats are a bit boring though, but we've still got the logo on the pedals. I do like this engine turned aluminium, which is very Bentley-esque, and it does liven up an otherwise pretty boring cabin that's got acres of elephant's bottom plastic in it. But if you ignore that, they're a really nice place to be in. They're a bit more spacious than the Mk4 and just a lot more comfortable really. Legroom improves significantly with the Mk5. I think it's probably bigger than a B6, B7, A4 in the back. But you wouldn't really want to carry too many people in this one because you've got these hardback seats which can get kicked and scuffed quite a lot. Apparently the owner vetted whoever went in the back very carefully, and you can tell really they are immaculate. Yeah, nothing really to tell you the back of this car is particularly special though. No R logos. Okay guys, let's have a look at the driving experience, and of course we're going to begin with the Mk4 because that was the first R32. It came out in 2002 and it was quite a shock to the system. We were used then to GTIs that had wood trim and horsepower in like the 150 if you were lucky. Well, this came out with 240, which at the time sounded amazing. Had that 3.2 litre engine. I think the V6 Motion predated it by a couple of years, and that was a 2.8 with 204 horsepower. This was 240, so quite a significant jump. But even though the engine was similar, it was the way they put the car together that made the big difference. It wasn't aimed at as being a refined luxury car for older people. Even though the engine was pretty similar, they geared it to be a track inspired car. So you know, you could drive this on a track day and it would be pretty much sorted from the off. You couldn't really improve it an awful lot. It had 2-piece brakes like you've seen already. The suspension's quite firm. But the downside of that is on a British B road it is quite unsettled. You know, it really is being upset by every little imperfection. These aren't holes or particularly big bumps, you can barely see them, but I'm doing a bit of a nodding dog. But the steering rack, I believe, was from a TT, so it was a little bit higher ratio than on a standard Golf, which made it feel a bit sharper. Whether the chassis itself could actually keep up with that, I'm not too sure, because they do tend to go into understeer quite easily. They might be four-wheel drive, but it takes quite a lot of time for the rear drive to wake itself up, and by which point you probably understeer across the lane. When you turn into corners, you're not going to feel the back power up and then help you round. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame, because on something like a Mk7R, it's got quicker four-wheel drive, it's got torque vectoring which pulls the car around. These just do feel front heavy, and okay, that does mean that you do have a front heavy car, but if you're not on it all the time, you do get a lot of character. That's second gear now. It sounds brilliant, and it does like to rev, and it does respond to somebody with a heavy right foot. If you like to wind up a car, this is for you. It's totally unlike the turbocharged engines that we're used to in modern cars. It's very old-fashioned in that respect. It's a very lovable old thing. Now, yeah, the ride quality will be a negative to some people. Passengers tend to complain about it more than drivers, but again, it just adds to the character. You know, just doing 40 miles an hour that we're in something special simply by the way the car's riding. Okay, it's not the cleverest way of adding character, but it was done by the factory. Somebody hasn't chopped the springs and done it on a Sunday afternoon. This is how it left the factory, and you know, we have to applaud Volkswagen for producing such a car that was pretty hardcore. Okay guys, let's see how that ride quality affects how this car handles on a British B road. We've driven this road before in the Club Sport S versus Edition 40 video. You might recognise it. It's quite a good little road. It's only short, but it does do everything required in that distance. So that's third gear, lovely, onto fourth and back into third. Yeah, not bad. Traction control, like intervention there. It's a bit flat, and then around 4,500 it does pick up its skirts. That was 6,000 rev changer. The brakes are pretty mighty, but then they should be, because they're just a downside version of those on the RS4. Yeah, not bad. It does feel when you get back on the gas that if you're not too careful with the application of the throttle, you're going to push it into understeer, because it does have a really sharp throttle response, which can be quite annoying actually. I did get a car remapped. I had a Project R32 in 2013, loved it a lot. I took it to the Nürburgring, had a laugh there, and it was brilliant. But one thing that it did do was it was really jerky on the throttle. They all do that, and I went to the mapper and said, can you make it less jerky? And he said no, the amount of air going into it is so much that you can't stop it. The minute the throttle butterfly opens, it's like gush, and that's what makes it jerky. So it's fine, you just have to really be careful, as I say, because if you go back on the gas, it's like boof, and it can upset the tyres and send you into understeer. So it's almost worth being in a higher gear just to dampen the throttle response of it. If you've ever driven like a car in sport mode, like an RS4, they are pretty horrible like that, and that's how it can feel. Okay, that's a third. So let's just be brave and get back on the gas. A tiny bit of understeer then. We're on relatively new Continental tyres now, and they're not too bad actually. Sport Contact 5. That's 6,000, change up into fourth. We've got a funny camber here, so onto the brakes, into third. That would, yeah, a tiny bit of drifting wide there. And then feel like it's edging to the edge of the road, which isn't a particularly nice feeling, but yeah, it's a combination of the weight, the throttle response, and the fact that the tyres are kind of being disturbed quite a lot by what is an imperfect road surface. But it's still a hoot to drive, and the noise is spectacular, isn't it? I've drove my project car on track, and it was great. It was a really good beginner's track day car. It wasn't the fastest thing in the world, but when I had it remapped, okay, we couldn't get rid of the jerkiness, but we did up the rev limit a bit, which made it, surprisingly, an extra 500 revs made quite a big difference at Castle Key. So yeah, I like that one, and I still like this one, but will I like the Mk5 R32 more? Let's find out. Okay, here we are in the Mk5 Golf R32, and while we still continue to have bucket seats in this car, which is quite unusual in a Mk5 R32, we've got an automatic gearbox with paddle shifters. The car immediately feels a bit more grown up. It feels very similar to Mk6, which it's not a surprise because they're basically the same car, but it even feels, you know, closer to Mk7, which is a modern current car. So things haven't really progressed in the 10 years. Nothing like the progress from Mk4 to Mk5. I feel like I'm sitting higher as well, but as you've probably seen from other clips, it's much more willing to give that lovely R32 noise, as if there's been a bit of time spent developing it to sound good. While with the other car, the Mk4, they just put the exhaust on and thought, well, it's a V6, it's going to sound good. With this, they've made the effort to make the most of that. And you can't beat it. The other big progress was with ride quality. Now, it's not the softest car in the world, it's obviously passive dampers with 18-inch wheels just like the Mk4, but it just feels a little bit more rounded, you know, much more, it just is on the right side of the comfort zone when it comes to ride quality, while the Mk4 would lose buyers on test drives or older, you know, people who weren't really so intent on having an R32 because they just couldn't live with the ride quality. Well, it's probably quite unlikely a Mk5 buyer would have done that. And when coupled with a DSG box in this car, it's a perfectly practical, usable thing. Okay, these have got the bucket seats that limit the appeal of this car to some degree because they won't suit everybody in the back, so the seats are very prone to being kicked. But it's a 5-door, so you know it's as practical almost as any Golf you can buy. Obviously, with DSG on R32s anyway, or the higher end Volkswagens, you do get paddle shifters, which mean they're all, people don't realise they're always live, so you can always just dip in if you come into a bend or a roundabout and then select the gear before the box knows what's going to happen, because you can see what's going to happen. And then when you come off the roundabout, just don't touch them again, they go back to auto mode within about 20 seconds. So that's quite a useful thing to know. But if you want to put it in manual mode, you can, and it just will then, it won't let you stall it or it won't over rev it, but it won't change gear for you outside of those two extremes of the rev range. Another big change with Mk5 is that the body shell rigidity improved quite a lot, so you don't get a lot of the creaks and rattles you get in the Mk4. That you can feel the shell flexing on, especially the Mk4 R32, because it's got such stiff suspension. So just going over an even ground, even slowly, you can hear the shell and all the trim bits creaking, while this feels significantly stiffer, and as a result it's much less of a rattle trap. Well, we're on my favourite bit of road now. I'm going to drop a couple of gears. We're going to see it. We know it's going to refine, but will it excite a keen driver? That's third gear, some reversing in the middle of the road, and that's third, so drop it down to second. Probably didn't need to go for second there, but lovely Mk5 balance. I think the Mk4, okay, it's got independent rear suspension just because it's 4-wheel drive, not because it was designed to have it as a whole. It's the only Mk4 with independent suspension simply because they wanted to fit the 4-wheel drive system in, while the Mk5 was built from the beginning with independent suspension, and that's why it's leagues ahead of the Mk4 when it comes to the combination of ride quality and handling. And yeah, so this is still 4-wheel drive, but it feels a lot more neutral and manages to still be composed without being too hard, which on these kind of roads means you just go a lot quicker. So let's try that again. We're in auto obviously, but we're going to use the paddle, so that's into third. Just, yeah, you feel the back end helping you around a lot more in this. And we're riding these bumps and it's not upsetting the car at all. And the brakes are really good. I mean, they're only one-piece steels, but they're bigger. And yeah, it wasn't Club Sport S levels of control there, but it was still good. And then just one more. Yeah, it's lovely. It feels really chuckable, to coin a phrase. You just get it into the corner and you feel the back kind of leaning around to help you around, and you get back on the power and you're out. It's very good. Now, if we have to come to a conclusion which one's best, it's not easy. I personally quite like the way this drives. I'm more into the way a car drives and the way it looks. I won't argue with you, the Mk4 looks really much more aggressive and yeah, much more exciting to look at. But the Mk5 drives strangely in a more rounded way, more like a normal car, but still manages to give you the buzz of an R32. The engine gives its noise much more readily. You don't have to rev it as hard. It's there much more often. And obviously with an R32 that's really important because the engine noise is key to its appeal. I think I probably quite like the DSG as well. It makes, these aren't the most powerful cars in the world, and it makes the most of what you got. And you know, when you hear it change automatically, it just sounds like a Ferrari with a paddle shift change as well. So I'm leaning towards these, but then I'm 45 years old and I think I've probably grown more towards the Mk5 R32 as I've got older. But it's primarily because you can drive it faster on our roads and get more of a thrill from it than the Mk4, which is just a little bit too hard. It's more like a car somebody's modified themselves without going through the massive development process that the Mk5 has got. The Mk5 established itself in the range as a proper permanent extension to the range in 2005-ish, 6-ish, and as a result it was developed fully, so the noise was made to be more nice, the ride was meant to be more, you know, a better balance of ride and handling to appeal to a bigger audience. So it does probably everything the Mk4 does and more, but it doesn't look so good. But the Mk4 does feel like a collectible classic that is worth looking after, because one day it will be highly sought after. I mean, it already is. You know, low mileage can fetch over 20 grand, so that has to be a sign of long-term stability in values. But for a daily driver, there's no question about it. You have to buy a Mk5 because they're just much easier to live with. So that, you know, the conclusion is they're both brilliant. They're not particularly fast, but they're just both lovely, characterful cars. And the Mk5 maybe in time will become a little bit more covetable, but in the meantime it makes a wonderful daily driver with all-weather performance, because obviously it's four-wheel drive, which you wouldn't get with a GTI. And what you have to remember is the GTI is actually quite a thirsty car. That 2 litre TFSI, the old one, fitted to the Mk5, both the standard car and the Edition 30, is much more economical than this. So it's not something you choose on the basis of fuel consumption. But whichever one you choose, you can enjoy this sound, and then fuel consumption won't be too much of an issue.